Hey, this is Stuart with the Whitestone Ministry. This is part one of a series on Genesis that I'll be doing, and this is the first time there's been audio on any of the videos on the Through the Book channel on YouTube, and there should be audio coming up on all the videos ahead, and better videos also. And I just want to thank everybody for supporting the channel and for liking the videos and your comments on the videos also, and just general support. There have been complaints that there's been no narration on any of the videos, so that shouldn't be a problem anymore. So I just want to thank everybody. I thought I might as well start at the first book of the Bible, so I wanted to go over the creation account, and I just wanted to go over some things I don't hear talk too much about, and I have some of my own ideas. Some ideas are not mine, but I'd like to just put them in there. I thought it might make the creation account a little clearer. So starting with the first verse, the creation of heaven and earth, that verse is really just saying God did it, He has authority over it, and there are a lot of teachers that say it was perfect when He did it, and I would agree with that. And something happened after that, and the next verse would say the earth became without form and void. The verb is became, not was. So something caused it to become void and without form. Some cataclysm happened, and that could have been through angels or demons or some creatures that caused it to get out of control, and God had to come in and regenerate it. So, and notice also it says heaven and earth. Heaven is only singular, so apparently there was just heaven at that time, and God created more heavens after that as part of the regeneration. So next it says the earth was without form. That's the Hebrew word tohu, and void. That's the Hebrew word bohu. And void is like a chasm. That would be from the Greek like chaos, the word cow in Greek. And bohu is the Hebrew word. And tohu, I would suggest, could be the origin of the word two, in the meaning of something that's cut in two, something divided. When you cut something down, it becomes formless. And two is like two dimensions. You don't have any form, or you have sort of a form, but not a full form with just two. So that's what I would say there. I don't want to say much more about that. And then the next verse says darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Hebrew word for darkness is koshek, and that also includes spiritual darkness and wickedness, not just physical darkness. And the deep, the Hebrew word for that is tehom, and that would be like a mass. It includes the waters, but it's more than waters. It's the mass of waters and all the effects of gathering them together. That would be the noise, the clamor, tumult, and it's also boiling and raging. And I would say that that deep is hot. It's very hot. And related to that word tehom is the word whom, which the concordance will tell you that the word tehom comes from that word whom, which means the same thing, a clamor, a noise, a tumult, and that's the word to hum in English, and that's most likely where the word hum comes from in English, and that's like a raging, boiling, surging mass, and you could call that the waters of chaos, and or the clamor of the waters. You hear that term a lot, the waters of chaos. Very noisy, raging, troubled. Later in the Bible, the word troubled is used for the sea, and that's the word tehom. So that's a better image of what the deep was. And if you look into that word tehom, which comes from whom, you can see some other words that are related. The Hebrew word for sea is yam, and that means to roar. So you can see how that's related. So the H seems to have become a Y there. And another word is yom, which is day in Hebrew, and that means to be hot. The day is obviously the hot part. And that's clearly, or you could say that's related. So you have heat and roaring together. And even the word Ham, the name Ham, means the same thing. It means to be hot. And you can see there that word is probably related also. The third son of Noah's name was Ham, and that name means to be hot, tropical. And it's interesting that all of Ham's descendants settled south of Israel, in the south. And that leads right into the next word, the word for south, which is yamiyn. And, the south is obviously hot. And also the word for right comes from that, because in the Hebrew thought, the south was to the right, and that would be as you're looking east. They did directions from the point of looking east. And another word for south is Teman, and here you have the Y becoming a T, and also as from an H. So Teman, which was a land in Edom, and that was the name for south, and that came from the word yamiyn. And the change in the word to the T in Teman is that's a denominative word. That means it's a proper noun, like a name. So that's like a name for the south. So here we have all these words which describe that deep in the beginning of Genesis, and it's like this boiling, raging, roaring mass, just a troubled, chaotic substance that God's having to subdue. And I would say that the deep is also known as the substance ether. That's the substance of the universe. They used to teach that the universe was made out of ether. You don't hear it taught anymore very much, and it would seem like they're covering that up. But I would agree that the universe is some kind of ether substance. And you can say further that the ether is time itself. And that has a lot of implications. We can see that God is actually subduing time in the book of Genesis. And a lot of believers would agree that God is beyond time. He stands above time itself. It's just the creatures that are bound by time. And we think of time as just an abstraction, but there are a lot that will tell you that time itself is a substance. They've actually done studies that clocks actually will move differently depending on where you are on the earth. They've taken a clock and put it on the ground, and they've taken a clock and put it in an airplane at the same time. They set it at the same time, and when they bring the clocks back together, the clock in the airplane has actually moved faster. And so they figured out that time seems to actually move faster the further away you get from the earth. So they're starting to think that time actually has a substance to it. And a lot of people think it's the fourth dimension. And they've noticed that in these clocks they use, they're atomic clocks, they have a substance called cesium, and it seems to decay faster the further you get away from the earth. So there's something going on. And if you have this ether substance, which is the deep in Genesis, which could also be time itself, that's what we're seeing. God is actually subduing time itself. And you can see a connection with the deep, with time. There are a couple other Hebrew words that might be related. I can't prove that they're related, but I'll give you a suggestion. The word for deep, tahom, is very much like two other words, ta'am and ta'om, and those words mean twin, or double, or to couple together, join together, or to divide. And you would wonder, how does tahom, or the deep, how is that connected to a twin or to divide? Well, you can see that deep can act like a mirror. Anyone can see like a pond or a lake can reflect. It can act like a mirror, and you see your twin in it or a double in it when you see the reflection. So here we have a body of water acting like a mirror, or a divider, giving you a twin, a double. So there's a possible connection there. I can't say that's proven, but there's a connection there. And mirrors are very important. You see them a lot in modern fairy tales. Mirrors are very prominent. They're prominent in spirituality, witchcraft, mythology, and there are actually implications even in the Bible how demons, spirits, angels, they can move, or their image can move in using like a mirror. And time travel even could be involved with mirrors. And so you see a connection there. And even further, you can see how the English word time could be connected. It sounds a little bit like those words, ta'am, ta'om, tahom. And so the English word time, it comes from the Old English timo and Germanic tima, and those are from the Proto-Indo-European da or die, which mean to divide. And so with time, you're like dividing. You're dividing periods of time. And it's interesting, the Greek word daimon is related. That's like a divinity or a small god that acts to divide out wealth and fortune. It's like a provider. It's doling out goods to different people. And so there you have a demon, which is a little god, and it could be good or bad, but demons were often seen as good in ancient times because they provided for you based on how you treated the demon. So here you have a divinity, and the word divinity also seems to be related to divide. You can see that in that. And another Greek word is demos, which means division of society or people, and that came to mean people or land, and that's like the Greek word democracy, democratic, demagogue. So we have a connection to time, that God seems to be subduing time itself when he subdues the deep. And you might say, what was one way he subdued that? Well, the next verse, it will tell you that the Spirit, or Ruach, of God was on the face of the waters. The Hebrew word for spirit is Ruach, and that means wind, spirit, force. And you might ask, was God cooling down the waters by blowing on it? That he was blowing the wind on the waters, like the way you blow on a hot bowl of soup to cool it down. So God was actually cooling down the waters. And it gives you an indication in the book of Job what he was doing. There it says, the face of the deep is frozen. And that's the same word for deep there, tahom. And the word for face is panim. The word for frozen is lakad. And that word for frozen is to capture, cohere, stick together, congeal. And so God was actually freezing time itself, the ether, the deep. He was freezing it on the edge, or the face. And he was doing that to contain it. He was having to contain the universe. So it appears that's what he was doing there in that verse. It's interesting that in a lot of ancient myths, like the Babylonian, Sumerian, and Akkadian writings, there are stories of gods, like the god Marduk or the god El, subduing a being called Tiamat, which was the dragon of the waters. And the word Tiamat, the name for the dragon, is actually the same word. It's the same etymology as Tehom for the deep in the book of Genesis. So we have a similar story, and they're related somehow. Some would say that the Bible came from that myth, but I would say it's the other way around. Those myths came from the Bible. The Bible was there first. But anyway, so we have this war between, or battle between God and the deep, or in other myths we have some other god like Marduk or El battling with Tiamat. And this Tiamat, or Tehom, the deep, or the ether, the universe, is struggling or rebelling against God. And since we believe that God only creates good things, they become evil when they rebel against him. And so God may have created the deep for some purpose, but it is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be dividing things in a certain way, but they're doing them according to their own plan, their own purpose. They're using it for evil and not good, or not the way that God wants for them to do it. So God is having to step in and do the dividing himself in the proper way. He's bringing order out of the confusion that has been caused by other beings. And darkness, you could say, is one of them. And it does say that, like I said earlier, darkness was on the face of the deep. And God, as he subdues time and the ether and the universe, he's now subduing darkness. And so we have the surface or face of the deep is covered by darkness, and God is also congealing the edge of the deep or the universe, So it's dark and now cold. And another aspect of this is the other place of the universe, or the earth at least, the tohu, which is the part that's without form, which is this empty waste. It is referred to also in the book of Job. It says that he stretches the north over the empty place, and the word for empty there is tohu, which is the earth that is without form. So here again, God is stretching out the north, which is the cold, dark place. The north in the Bible is gloomy, dark, cold, and the word in Hebrew is zephon, which means gloomy, dark, mysterious, hidden. So here we have God is setting up the north, and it appears that he's going to place his throne on the north. It mentions the sides of the north in the Bible, and that is the Mount of Assembly, the congregation, the throne, that actually the being Lucifer aspires to take over. So here we have the north being stretched out over the tohu, or empty place. And this is all part of God containing the universe as he freezes the edge, he hardens the edge, and now he's subduing darkness. And he brings forth light out of the darkness as he cools down the deep also. And you can also look at this, his spirit is blowing on the waters. And now the waters have several states. We know there are 3 states, the solid, liquid, and gaseous form. But there's also believed to be a 4th state, the plasma state of water, which is known to have very different properties from what we usually see. It can bring forth light, it can conduct electricity, it can transmit energy. It's a very different thing. So God is subduing this aspect of water here, and he calls forth light. And light he brings forth out of darkness, or he divides it from the darkness. Now, it does also say in other parts of the Bible that the darkness and the light are very similar to God, and he can see through both. He can see into both. They're both the same to him, and they both shine the same. So it shows his power over both of them, actually. But the Bible also tells us that light and darkness are not the same. They're not equal. In Isaiah, it says that God says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. So darkness and evil are very similar, and they're associated with creating, which is different from being formed. And you might see this as light being formed into waves, but darkness is only perhaps particles. And here again, the deep is covered by darkness, and you might call that dark matter. It's particle physics, and there seems to be a debate in science. I don't know that much about it, but they think that energy goes in either waves or particles. So I would say that light is waves, which God formed, and darkness is only particles. And darkness is inferior to light. And also in Ecclesiastes, it will tell you that light excels darkness. That means light is better. It can take over the darkness. It's superior to it. And it will say that wisdom is better than foolishness, the same way that light is better than darkness. So here we have God subduing the darkness, and he's dividing them. And it says that he sees that the light is good, and that's good as in a useful thing, good for life, good for habitation. It's not good in the way God is. It's not. It's still a created thing, but it's good for habitation. But he doesn't say anything about darkness, so we assume, like it says in Isaiah, that darkness is evil. So here we have a distinction, and God divides them. He calls the light day, which I said earlier is yom, which has heat to it, and darkness he calls night, and that is Lael in Hebrew. That's the name he gives to the darkness, Lael. And he's dividing them. He sees that the light is good, and separates them, and that's the end of the first day. So now we have two different elements showing up in the book of Genesis, light and darkness, and they're fundamentally different. One is formed and one is created. Formed in Hebrew is yatsar, and created in Hebrew is bara. And God is establishing order in this chaotic substance. He's formed light, he's hardened the edge of the universe or time, the ether, and he's calmed the waters now. And it's kind of like he's creating a house of mirrors in a good way, but which still can also be used in a bad way, or had been and will be in the future until the end. So the mirrors are a way for spirits to travel, I would say. It's a way for good and bad angels to travel, demons, spirits. They use these mirrors, like the calm water acts as a mirror, light passes images, the surface, the outer surface of the universe, which is like a crystalline hardened surface, also acts as a mirror. So here we can see all these mirrors being put in place. And the next thing God's going to do is to divide the waters. And maybe what he's doing here is creating different states of water. We know that there's a solid state, a gas state, a liquid state, and there's possibly a fourth state, the plasma state, and he's establishing an order there. And he's going to use, I would say he's going to use wind again, or his spirit, to divide the waters, just in the same way he blew on the waters, or again I would say he blew on the waters to cool them down, to calm them down. He's going to divide the waters with his spirit again. And the word for firmament, which he uses to divide the waters, is rakia in Hebrew. And that has the meaning of to pound out, to spread out, to hammer out. And some people conceive of the firmament as being this hard substance like metal or rock that divides the lower from the upper, but I would say that's an incorrect conception. It's more just an expanse that acts to divide the water, and it appears there's no water in it inside the firmament because it's dividing the water, and water can't pass through it unless it's allowed to in some other form, but I can get into that later. But there is a connection to the English word rock. There's an Indo-European root, rook, from which we get the English rock, and it has the meaning of like to shake, like to shake a cradle, to rock the earth, to cause a tumult. And it has a similar meaning, not quite the same, but maybe the meaning has shifted there. So rakia and the English rock are kind of similar, and God uses wind to do this, and wind has a lot of power to it. It can shake things, and there is a Hebrew word rock, which is to pound, from which rakia is derived. Now there's another meaning to rakia. It is connected to wind, which is ruach, or spirit, and so those are similar, and I would say that's connected to the time of Moses when God divided the waters there, or divided the Red Sea. It says he used an east wind to divide the waters. And he also divided the Jordan when the Israelites came into the Promised Land. So we see he's doing this with wind. So he's divided the waters with wind. He's created the firmament, which I would say is a type of wind. There are a couple more interesting connections to the word rakia in Hebrew for firmament that are possibly related. The English word rock, which is hard or firm, like the firmament, has the same consonants as rakia. And also the word arch, which has the same consonants, except the vowels are moved in a different position, also has the same consonants. An arch is a vault, like the vault of heaven, the expanse of heaven. It has an arch to it, an arc to it. So there you see the same consonants. It's a possible connection. And there's even another connection which is a little bizarre, and I'll suggest that I can't say it's proven, but I'll just add it in. That's another word which has the meaning of weaving or a weaver's shuttle. And the connection there is that the vault of heaven is spread out, and it says in other places in the Bible, heaven's spread out like a tent or a curtain. And he stretches out the heavens like a curtain, or spreads them out like a tent. You know, a tent is a fabric that you would have to weave. So there's a connection there. And there is a word in Hebrew for a weaver's shuttle and a verb to weave. It's arig. And there again you have similar consonants to rock or rakia. And there's an English word, the English word rack is related, and that comes from a Proto-Indo-European root, rook, which means a weaver's shuttle, and we get words like rocket from that, and it stands up straight, and it would be used for weaving. It would have a use for weaving. And interestingly, the word arachnid seems to come from that. That has a connection to weaving. The spider weaves a web. So if you look at it this way, you can see heaven as a type of web, and I can get to a further connection to spiders in a minute, but I'll go back and just say that it's interesting that God does not call heaven good. You don't see it, just like he didn't say darkness was good. The only thing he has called good so far, or seen as good, not called good, but he saw it as good, is light. So both darkness and heaven are not considered good, or they're not seen as good by God. So that tells you a little something about heaven. It's kind of shocking because we think of heaven as a good place, right? It's where good people go when they die. It's where the saints are, the angels are, God is. But actually God is above the heavens. And it also says in the Bible that the heaven of heavens can't contain God, so he's beyond heaven. And we know that there are evil spirits that can go to heaven. The Bible says that Satan himself appears in heaven. So we see heaven in a different way, and if you look at it like a web, and I've referred to the mirrors earlier, so now we have a house of mirrors and a web. So you have to know what you're doing when you're passing through these heavens. They're not necessarily all good. So anyway, we have a connection to a web here, and now I'll show a further connection to spiders. There is a word for spider in the Hebrew. It's samamith. And now it's interesting that that word is connected to what God calls the firmament. He gives it a name. He says he calls it heaven in the English, and in Hebrew that's yamiyn. And the word yamiyn has a connection to the number 8. The word for 8 is similar. And the connection there is the heaven was thought of as transcendent, and the number 8 was thought of as transcendent. It transcended the number 7, which was the number of completion. So 8 transcends the 7 like heaven transcends the earth. And the spider has 8 legs, so we see a connection to 8 there. It's kind of a weak connection, but there are some even further connections that kind of make it a little stronger. According to the concordance, the word for spider in Hebrew comes from another word, shamem, in Hebrew, which means to stun, stupefy, astonish, desolate, poison, and that's connected to a spider through its ability to poison, to stun its prey, and also lizards and serpents. They can poison their prey, stun them, paralyze them, whatever. And that word shamam is very similar to the word yamiyn, so we can see a connection there. And you can say that the heavens act to stun, to astonish, to stupefy. People have been astonished by the heavens from the beginning. They worship the stars, they worship the thunder, the clouds, they see heaven with fear, with dread. and a lot of gods and goddesses have been connected to the heavens. And there is another connection that may not be directly related, but it corresponds in English. The word thunder in English comes from a Proto-Indo-European root, tun or stun, which means to stun. That's directly where the word stun comes from. And so thunder is something that stupefies, terrifies, astonishes, makes desolate. And that word desolate is interesting because we hear of the abomination of desolation that makes desolate. And the Queen of Heaven, or the abomination of the Sidonians or Canaanites, the Ishtar, Ashtoreth goddess, she's connected to heaven, and she astonishes, stupefies, stuns. So we see something going on there. And also in the book of Ecclesiastes, there's this woman character mentioned. It says, I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets, and her hands is bands. Whoso pleaseth God will escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. So here we have this woman character that enters in the picture, and she also stuns. And I would say this figure is connected to the heavens also, and I can go more into that later. But we see this connection with spiders and also serpents to stunning, just like heaven does. There is another connection that I can't prove absolutely, but it is a possible connection between heaven and serpents. That's the name of heaven, yamiyn. It's very similar to another word, shenian, which means twin, double, divide, divider. And that's connected to the word I mentioned earlier for ta'am or ta'om, which means twin, double, which is very much like the word for deep, tehom. But shenian is also connected directly in concordances with the word Tingan, and it also means double, second divider, twin. And Tingan is very similar to the word for dragon or serpent or sea monster, which is tanim. And I can't prove that absolutely, but I would suggest it. And so here we have a connection between heaven and serpents. And the Bible mentions the crooked serpent, and the Bible says, he hath garnished the heavens by his spirit, and his hands have formed or twisted the crooked serpent. And that could refer to heaven and also Satan. The crooked is more like an arch or something round or curved. It doesn't really directly refer to something criminal or corrupt, although it could indirectly. But that crooked, that curved, rounded feature is like heaven, the vault of heaven, which seems to be also an arch. So there's the connection to serpents there. The crooked serpent is pretty clearly Satan and all his minions, and they're connected to the heavens also. And so we see that the heavens are not always good. They may be cleaned out in the future where they are good, but the evil spirits seem to be able to pass into the heavens also, or at least part of the heavens. So we can see that heaven is not always necessarily good. The Bible often refers to God smiting the dragons in the waters. There's a passage in the Psalms where it says he broke the heads of Leviathan in pieces, and that's some kind of dragon in the waters. And God seems to need to smite those dragons when he's dividing the water. They seem to have the power to divide the water also, but they don't do it according to God's purposes. They have their own purposes, and God will oppose them, and he overpowers them. And so the Leviathan is this dragon in the waters, and heaven is in the waters. It divides the waters, so you can think of heaven as swimming in the waters. That's its purpose, is to divide the waters. And the Leviathan can also be seen as Lucifer, which means the light bearer, or Ouroboros, and that's often depicted as a snake that's biting its tail that goes in this round circular pattern, and that some kind of dragon in the waters, and it refers to heaven and all the power, at least the evil powers that God is opposing and overcoming. This is the end of part 1, and the next part will continue with the third day of creation, the separation of earth and sea, the appearance of trees, seeds, grass. And so until next time,